Hey everyone, this is Known Coaching 2, the second assessment, which is your report on your club placement and your practical coaching that you're doing. So for assessment 2, part 1, there's a couple of different sections here. So you can see this document on the left-hand side. There's quite a few sections you need to go through. So this should be based on the club or the organisation that you are using to be delivering your practical coaching with. So, for example, you could be in a netball club, basketball club, active schools. You could be in like something like Little Kickers or Touch United, or even the Partick Thistle Springburn Academy program. It doesn't matter. This is all just based on what happens in the organization, who makes decisions, how you involved in that process, and where are you in terms of the sort of the design of that club. And then just sort of really then discussing and going through the planning and programming of the coaching delivery of this project. So a couple of different things that are going to be involved with this project. Here's a suggested structure, just to give us a bit of an idea of what we're doing, just to keep us on the straight and narrow today. So you need to have an introduction and then cover these 6 main points here. There is a PowerPoint, as you can see on the right-hand side, that I'm going to go through, which is kind of a guide to this assessment. It's got some really good questions for you to look into that help prompt you to know what to talk about. So again, it's a report, so remember to use report format. So it should be put your headings and then put in all the paragraphs, etc. Try not to write in bullet points too much, even though they are in the assessment in bullet points. That's for you to know to keep yourself right in sort of more of a chronological order or an order of importance. You should be writing this up in that format. So right, so you've got to give us a bit of an introduction and then show evidence of your involvement of at least one of the people from this list below involved in the planning of the coaching program and how your role or what is your role in that planning process. So, in a nutshell, you could be looking at the coaches one. That could be quite an easy one, for example. And you might say that if you're the head coach, great, then obviously you're involved with lots of the decisions. If you are the assistant coach and there is a head coach, then we want you sort of talk about that dynamic and how do you guys sort of get involved with that. Okay. So just going to go through each stage of the assessment for you, just so you know that. When we go through this, like I said, you've got that written report. There's also going to be more of an overarching spreadsheet that sort of talks about the actual sessions that you guys are involved with. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there's a bit of a spreadsheet for you to sort of just show us that overall plan. This is linked basically to your 18 session plans that you are doing for your session design for the project. So Donna and Peter, or whoever your lecturers are, will have been getting you to do 6 session plans for physical and skill related fitness, 6 on skill acquisition, and then 6 on decision making. So it's just making sure that's all linked together here. So it is a written report, but it's also just a bit of a design of that element of it as well. Okay. So as we go through this, you pick how is the program designed. Okay, so for let's say a typical club environment, the coaches will probably be deciding the sessions, the season, what skills they're working on, what do the players need. So let's say they're under 12s, for example, they might still be looking at positional things and learning how to play in a formation or how to set or carry out certain tactics like a counter attack or something like that. So you'll be then talking about how the coaches come together. Do they have a meeting at the beginning of the year? Do they have meetings every month? Do they have meetings every week? What are those meetings? Is it informal conversations that happen before training sessions? And then it's sort of like, this is what happens. Please go away and design something, come back. But all you need to do is just explain what happens. So, for example, when I was a head coach, we'd have a pre-season meeting. So we would discuss before pre-season, we'd have a meeting, me and my assistant coaches, and we would decide on our key priorities. And then we would assign those key priorities throughout the season of when we're going to work on them the most. Yes, you're developing players all the time, but there's going to be key themes throughout this. Now, there could be a different type of model out there, like an active schools program you're working in, or something like Tots United, or a company that just involved with mass participation, fun for really, really young kids, for example, and they have a program for you, and that's designed by the company, by the stakeholders, by the owners, or by like a head of education or head of programming, and they're the ones that deal with this. Or you could be in a very unique position where the players and the participants themselves, they're the ones involved with deciding what they want to work on. You could be working with a masters group of athletes, for example, if you're in that position, and they might be saying, look, we know how to play the game. We just want to have fun, but we want a bit of a key theme, and these are the themes that we want to work on. And then you as a coaches would go away and design sessions based on that. However it's done, you need to sit in there and talk about that. So I would then be discussing things like we have a meeting once a month, it's face to face, and what we do is we talk about what we want, when we want to work on these themes, and you go away and design sessions, or they tell you what to do, or they give you those sessions. Talk about your involvement in that process. So again, second bullet point here. Are you able to add your input? Is your opinion thought of? You might have to be a little bit creative sometimes, just the way that you decide to sort of explain some of this, just because each environment is going to be vastly different, so I can't cover them all in one video, but you could just be saying, look, we have very informal conversations in the car park before a session, and then I just pull out some games that I know that I do, and I'm very good at creating those sorts of activities, or I have a curriculum full of things that I need to do, and I just pick out the ones that we want to work on, or it could be very, very rigid. So when it talks about what's your involvement or influence on that, if you've got a very rigid program, you just get given things to deliver, you might say, well, within that session, I'm able to focus on real key coaching cues, or really I'm able to sort of like add progressions at my own speed. I'm able to decide, right, everyone's understood that, everyone's moved on, everyone's completing this, and everyone understands that part of it. Right, we can move on. So just explain your sort of influence in that sort of planning and programming of everything that happened, meetings, WhatsApps or Snapchat, however that they're dealt with. Okay. Here's just questions to help you through that process that can sort of help you all the way through that. So just explain it. Like I said, use these as prompts. You don't have to answer all of these questions. You might not remember all of the conversations, for example, so what was discussed, but you can just put like 2 or 3 examples of what was talked about and when it was talked about, and what was the final outcome of those meetings. And then you had an idea of what you're working on for the next month or so, and then you moved on from there. Okay. So that's section 1, just the whole planning part of it. Section 2, you need to talk about 2 of these 4 points now. Okay, I'll zoom in a little bit there. Ooh, too much. Okay, so here you need to now just talk about 2 of these different areas, and you're going to sort of explain them in detail and think what best applies for your environment. Okay, so you either talk about identifying the information sources the coaches use to plan and prepare sessions, organizational requirements that determine session delivery, the importance of explaining to others their roles and responsibilities, or the participants' rights and choices. Personally, I find number 1 and number 2 are probably the easiest to talk about, depending on your situation. But again, I'll talk through them all. So here you need to explain, number 1, identify the information sources that coaches use to plan and prepare sessions. So this, for example, is any website that you use to get your coaching drills from. You could be looking at YouTube channels. Name those YouTube channels. So if it's Dave's Coaching, or if it's Peter's Keepers, or if it's Donna's Dynamic Netball website or YouTube channel, then just quote those sources, say this has got great attacking drills in there, it's got great beginners drills, it's got great drills for under 10s, under 12s, under 15s, under 13s. You may even use governing body websites. So, for example, the SFA do have learning materials on there. So Scottish football do. I'm sure Scottish basketball. I know Scottish rugby have like a community of coaching resources that they send out. And there's also people that share that sort of stuff as well. I'm sure some of the lecturers have actually shared some of these sort of books from maybe certain academies or other coaches, etc., that have put them out up there on the internet. Just quote these references and say, these are some of the information and the sources that you use to plan your sessions with. You can refer to drills that you've learned from other coaches in your previous experience, but I would just name those coaches and say, as a player, under this particular coach, they, under 5 years of playing with that coach, they had all these drills, and that's the type of drills that you use. Just explain the category you would put those drills in. So, like, are they skill drills? Are they opposed skill drills? Are they game-related practices? Are they conditioned games? Are they sort of isolated drills with a fun activation games, all that type of stuff? So have a bit of variety of different sources, so it gives you a lot to talk about here. Number 2, The organisation requirements that determine session delivery. I would here really be narrowing down on the club tells me when we're coaching. So they say, right, you've got a football pitch from 7 till 8 o'clock, and you've got half that pitch because you share the other half of the pitch with a different team or a different age group. That's a that's a constraint put on you, and that will determine how much space you've got based on the numbers and all that type of other stuff. If you're working in a semi-professional environment or a performance pathway, very different set of environment that might be quite highly resourced, but you might have certain requirements from them. It's very performance driven, very orientated around their sort of high end results or sort of performance related results, or setting certain targets for them to achieve. Or there are sort of more constraints put onto and slightly less freedom, but that's where you've got to work from. It could just be, for example, active schools, and they're like, okay, yeah, you're going into the school, so you're in a school, primary school hall. We all know how small they are. You're in a mugger environment at a primary school, or you've got this school's got a particular astro pitch, and you've got the full pitch, and you've got loads of all that sort of stuff. But then also think about equipment and stuff like that as well, coaches that are available to you, and some of the other sort of things that could be determined to you by the organization. Number three, the importance of explaining others and their roles and responsibilities. So if you're in a position where you've got other coaches in there, you might be the attack coach and you've got a defense coach, and you will have to sort of explain who's doing what, just to make sure that the attack coach is sticking to the attack and not focusing on defense. This can happen, obviously, if a team's losing, and it's very frustrating because the attacking coach is like, well, I can't get my guys to attack because we know we have the ball. We need to get better at defending. And then people's roles and responsibilities get a little bit blurred. So it's really important that we explain those. How do we explain people's roles to each other? How's a club doing that? Or how do you do that if you're in that role? So it could just be, like I said, for me at pre-season, I had an attack coach, I had a defensive coach, and then we eventually just sort of changed it around to another team that I was with. We had a forwards coach and a backs coach, okay, and they focused on that. And then it was my role to then talk about how they cohesively played in attack or defense. So again, what are them and what are their roles and responsibilities, etc. as well. The participants' rights and choices. This is a little bit more leaning towards maybe your organisation or club has like an ethos or code of conduct, etc. The governing body might imply that there's certain rights and responsibilities that you need to uphold as part of good practice. So again, you would need to personally look into those in for your sport and to find that out. Like it might fall under the rights of the United Nations rights of children to, like, obviously to be able to play sports safely, to have a safe environment, to not get bullied, to not be discriminated against, to have access to equipment and that type of stuff. So just you would really need to look into what that is. But your club might say it's up to every player to decide what position they want to play in, and we have to try and facilitate that as best we can. And that type of thing. So again, just be mindful that there's a couple of different things that could happen there. Okay. Right. Section 2, again, just some points that go through that, just tells you what the requirements are for that one. So don't worry, but just pick two of those ones. A couple of examples there for you. Just pick two and then go through them. So number 3. So here, you're now explaining your program and how it's planned out for the whole year. So you're going to have to talk about macro cycles, mesocycles, and microcycles, how we do physical conditioning. So I'm just looking at this document here on the left now, if that helps. How do we sort of do physical training, etc.? When do we focus on skill acquisition, and when do we give players like performance targets and things like that as well? So again, here you now need to look at an in-depth to sort of explain what actually happens at training as well. Okay, so just loads of points. You now need to explain what is a macro cycle, what is a mesocycle, and how long do they last roughly for your sport. So I'll take rugby, for example. It's a bit like football and hockey. Season starts in September, finishes in April. Okay. You would then talk about different things like what a mesocycle looks like. So that then would be like pre-season, off season, and then the competitive season. And in that competitive season, we break that up into sort of the 8 months of the competitive season, or the 9 months. And so we've got 9 mesocycles in the competitive season. We have 2 mesocycles in the pre-season, and then they have 1 mesocycle as an off season, or 2, or however that works. Okay. There is diagram available for you guys as a sort of page to look at that has a spreadsheet that sort of explains this. But you need to go here now and explain what is a macro cycle, what is a mesocycle, what is a microcycle. Give some explanation what it is, and then explain it into your context in your club. So, for example, a Little Kickers or Touch United might have a 4-week program, and they follow a 4-week program, and then it's another 4-week program, then it's another 4-week program, and it's building up to a set of skills further on down the line. You sort of need to take that sort of overarching view of it. Explain that. Explain, how do we do skill acquisition? How do they learn skills? How do we look at physical conditioning? How do we look at their mental skills? What does the club do? What do we do in training sessions, etc.? So, for example, physical conditioning for myself would happen at pre-season. We really focus on that quite a lot. But then when I go into the actual season itself, I still make sure there's a physical component to a lot of the sessions. I still want them to really work hard on a Tuesday. I want them to be sort of quite cardiovascularly sort of a lot of endurance in there. They might have quite a lot of contact, a lot of power sort of develops in those sorts of sessions. And then in my Thursday session, that might be a little bit more skill acquisition. We're focused on the fine skills. We're executing game plans, a lot less contact, a little bit less running, but still a bit of tempo about it and explaining that. And then the mental skills, that could be covered in the training sessions. I used to have meetings and we used to talk about this sort of stuff in video analysis meetings and things like that, and talking about our mindset when we concede or what happens when mistakes are made, etc. How do you deal with that as a club? A lot of this might happen during training itself, the mental skills. That's fine. Just explain, like, obviously, when a kid gets upset and they talk about that, I might bring in the group just for 30 seconds to have a quick chat with them. So, guys, look, it's part of the game. We're going to concede points. How we deal with that is better. Can we turn a positive spin on that? So rather than focus on the negative, how do we fix it? How do we be constructive to go forward on that? So again, just a couple of examples there for you. What is a training unit for you? So a training unit is your sessions per week. So how many sessions per week does this group have? So for me, it was 2 1.5 hour sessions. The guys had like gym sessions as well, but that was up to them if they attended those, and they weren't run by myself. But I had 2 1.5 hour sessions and a game on a Saturday. So in that, talk about your training unit. Like I said before, for rugby, Tuesday, heavy contact, big contact skills, lots of cardiovascular endurance. It really was quite a draining session for the players. It was a bit more sort of like still trying to maintain that sort of fitness throughout of that, and explain what that looked like. So 10 minutes of warm up, contact drills, etc., making sure the body was physically ready, and then the mental preparedness as well as we went into that. We'd probably then spend 15 minutes or so doing contact drills, so like tackling drills, mauling, that type of activity, and then we'd do like 20 minutes of like some sort of skill under contact. So we might do like attack and defense games where players were still getting hit, but they had the ball in hand and they're learning to sort of evade the tacklers or how to take a soft shoulder, all these types of things that are sort of quite technical to my sport. And then we'd focus on a much bigger game that was a much more live sort of environment. Two teams just attacking each other with sort of either semi or heavy contact in that session as well. Then my Thursday session, that would be 7 till 8:30, again, an hour and a half, and then it'd be slightly different. So again, 10-minute warm up. It would be 20 minutes of unit skills. So my forwards would go off and work on their skills. The backs would go work off on their skills as well. Two separate groups would go and do their individual stuff. They'd do their work-ons, whatever they needed to do. And then we'd come back as a team and go through our technical run-throughs, like finish on some good sort of like executions and finishes and things like that. And then we might spend 10-15 minutes just letting the guys have a bit of fun playing touch rugby, but going through sort of like structured gameplay. So there was a game that we used to do where they would follow the structures of the game that we wanted, that we'd put into the actual practice, and that would be the last 20 minutes, but it's quite fun for them to do. Next bit would be individual interventions. So as a coach, how do you have one-to-ones? Do you do it in the session? Are you able to talk to players before, after sessions? Do you have one-to-one meetings? Every club's going to have a different environment. Every like Little Tots might be, for example, Touch United or Little Kickers, they might have a very different sort of way that you do interventions. It might just be on a one-to-one basis during the session. But how do you do those? How do you talk to them? How do you help individuals get better? How do you give them feedback? How do you work with that? It could be via text messages. It could be using video analysis, sending video clips of their performance. There's a whole host of different ways of how do you have one-to-one interactions with players and how do you make them better individually. Then you might have individual participant targets. I would definitely talk about this one. So, for example, you might say in a possession-based drill, right, You've got to maintain possession 60% of the time before you can score. You've got to have 5 passes before you can do this. And then you set those targets. You're trying to help individuals get to a certain point. You've got to have so many touches of the ball before you can then score. Or you've got to play in certain positions, and we set targets for them. So an easy activity for me is I would give them 5 balls to play with. So obviously 4 aren't in use at the first time. Once they've played with that first ball, when that ball goes dead or was successful and they scored, then they go on to the second ball, and then they pick up the second ball, and then off they went with that second ball. So there was a bit of jeopardy because obviously they weren't successful, and I said they've got to be successful 3 out of 5 times. If they've not been successful in ball number 1 and then ball number 2, they've only got 3 balls left, so it really increased the intensity in there as well. So that set them a target and set them a goal to help them get better. It could be for a striker to score goals. It could be a goalkeeper for saves, clean sheets, that type of stuff. It could be for defenders. You might say, right, you've got to make 4 out of 5 one-on-one duels, and obviously push push the attacker away, etc. All that type of stuff as well. And then the last point is there an evaluation schedule for all of this training? How do you as coaches come together and talk about all this type of stuff? So it could be at the end of every session, have a quick review as you're walking away over the training pitch. Happen quite a lot. You might have a meeting once a month where you talk about, right, how did this last 4 weeks go and what we're going to focus on for the next 4 weeks. It could be every 2 weeks. It could be it's done more informally, and then have lots of these conversations throughout and people talk. And then obviously at the end of the year, there's a bigger review then where all that sort of noted down and everything sort of like gone through with a bit more forensically at the end of the season. But what do you do? What happens? If you work for a company, do they talk to you about certain things as well? Do they ask for their feedback? Do they sort of like set targets for people as well? And set not targets, but they want to set sort of like the next sort of, is this group ready to now move on to more advanced drills? Right, here's the program for the next 4 weeks, etc. And you'd have to talk to them about that as well. Make sure you use references when you're doing this, especially when you talk about your mesocycles, macrocycles, and microcycles. Make sure you use that as best as possible. And then also you must be able to describe all those different stages and explain it in the context of your program. Okay, I'll explain the program document in a second, just so you're aware of it. There's an example of one for you to use, and you can just sort of go through that and explain everything that's happening. A few more bullet points for you to look at there. Just have a quick look at those, see if they help, see if they can talk about, give you a bit more things to talk about as well. But you need to make sure you've covered at least 2 of these different things in there as well. So whether that's goal setting or whether that is sort of review processes, etc. as well. So just make sure that that's all talked about as you go through that as well. So again, there's a couple of different things here. So whether that's one-on-one meetings with the participants, with the parents, etc., whether that's reviews of the program overall and its goals of its program, just pick 2 of these to make sure you talk about, and then off you go. You should be quite good with that one. There's just an example of one that's been provided, so you can have a quick read through that. It's all in the document there for you. And then you can move on to number 4. Okay, so with your number 4, this is your evaluation of the schedule. I think it's been merged with number 3 a little bit here, so don't worry. So just how's all this sort of managed? I think I covered this a little bit just a second ago, but just going through how are participants' performance levels and how do you use it to inform their goals going forward. So your individual players, how are we trying to make them better and how are they involved with that process? How do you talk to them? How do you explain what they're trying to work on? Do you have one-to-one meetings? Do you have that sort of messages back and forth, etc.? Or is it a bit more informal because they're quite young and you're doing it in training sessions and talking to them saying, oh, I remember we met last week. We're really trying to help you work on your weaker side or your less developed foot. We really want you to be able to use both feet quite effectively when passing, or you should be able to cross on both feet. You always use your right foot. It's going to be easy for the defenders to know which foot you're going to use, etc. So again, it could be a little bit more subtle, a little bit more hidden with younger athletes, but you might be in a more sort of performance orientated program as well. Talk about different barriers that you need to sort of like adapt to in the program design. So when things happen, like I don't know, you get kits out of cup competitions, for example, relegation could be a bit of a problem, or different things that might get you to adapt what you're doing. It could just be, for example, other barriers to development could be given to you for injured players and you're having to change what you do because a team needs more or less of something. The game might be changing or the league that you're in might be changing. So the style of play is different. So you're having to adapt to that type of thing as well. For example, I don't know, like my club used to move from grass to AstroTurf in the 2 months of deepest, darkest winter. So we had to then take away, we couldn't do too much contact because the guys couldn't fall onto AstroTurf as much as they could fall onto the grass. So we then had to remove that sort of heavy contact element to it as well. Again, these are all barriers and things that we had to adapt to that program design in the winter months as well. And just making sure we're doing that. All right, so a couple more bits you can talk about there if you want to. By all means, go through them to see what makes the most sort of use, makes more sense to you. And the other element is you've got to carry out a risk assessment. Your club should have a risk assessment, or your organisation will have a risk assessment. But as an example of one for you to use, you will have done one of these in your, if you can remember, developing professional practice last year, you would have definitely had to have gone through that and talked about a risk assessment and how do you sort of make sure that they're okay, and how do they make sure that these what to do in the event of someone getting injured and that type of stuff. So yeah, just make sure you have a look at what your club's got, ask them for one or carry one out yourself. Like I said, when I jump onto Canvas in a second, I'll show you there actually is a first aid risk assessment one in there anyway for you. So you're happy to do that as well. Okay, right. I need to log back in. I will have to update my video in a second. Once you've done that, number 5 is the sort of conceptual model thing. I'm just going to talk to you in a second about how we sort of like plan out the whole thing and how we sort of work on that to sort of bring it all together. And I will just show you that in a second. I'm just going to pause. We're back. So now I've logged back in properly. So if you scroll down on Known Coaching 2 and go down here, you've got an example of a periodized training plan, an example of a risk assessment. The risk assessment is quite simple. Like I said, from developing professional practice, it's there. If you've got one from your club, I always use that as well and copy and paste those over and make sure it's fully completed, and then you're good to go. Your training program and your plan, however, is slightly different. You now need to put all your 18 session plans together. You don't need to go through all 18 session plans. You might not have planned them all out yet, depending on when your lecturers have asked you to do that. But you should have at least designed the first 6, and you're probably sitting and looking and designing your next set of 6 now, but you might just now start to look at the themes. So as you can see here, this is based off a football season or a rugby season. So we've got pre-season. As you can see, we've got July, August, September. These are the weeks of the month. And this is when week number 1 starts at my pre-season. So you might be have done a session on power. Ooh, let's enable editing. So what is, just all I need here is the aim of that session. So you would have written the aim of your session from your 6 session plan. So copy and paste those aims over. So it could be to develop power in sprinting in a game. I don't know what you've done. Okay, so copy and paste those 6 that you've done in there, those first set of 6 session plans, put them in there, and then off you go. The next one with the pedagogy and skill acquisition one. So how are they learning those skills? That's just the theme of what you've been doing on the side and learning to do with Peter and Donna, but you're actually just designing them. It could just be, for example, how they're learning to do counter-attacking skills. Now, I am only writing a couple of words. You need to write full sentence here, okay? A good proper sentence of your aims and objectives. Sorry, just the aim of your sessions. And the last one could be decision making. Again, that's just a theme for you as a coach. Their theme might be slightly different. So it could be creating overloads, beating the fullback. I don't know. So it's a very football orientated one. All right. So just pick whatever suits you really. You're just the themes for your session plans, and then you're good to go. Okay. So you should have 18 overall. Don't worry if this changes, that's fine, because by the time you actually write all 18 session plans, or you as a group, however you decided to do that, this may change, but you're just planning these in now. What I need here, though, is just your theme of your session here. So again, it's covered here, so we know what it is. So you can just literally use simple words, so like develop power. Okay. Now, for those of you that don't know how to use Microsoft Excel, I have a quick one here. You're going to wrap text up in that one there, and you might then just reduce the size of the text just to make sure it fits in. There you go, develop power. Now, is there any games in the preseason? You might not have no games. All right, that's completely fine. Here, though, I might have a preseason friendly game, 1. I might have preseason friendly game 2, and then I might have league game 1. then League Game 2. All right, just going to reduce the size of that text. There we go. Right, I might have League Game 3. I might have Cup Game 1. Okay. Now, this is quite a common league structure for some of them. It just depends on how you're doing it. So League Game 4, League Game 5. Okay. And then another cup game. It just depends. Again, just best guess here. Just show you've actually looked at what the season looks like and you have a bit of an understanding of that one. Now, you might be doing a sport and you might only have competitions, I don't know, once every month. They're a dancer or they're gymnastics and there isn't competitions every month. So it could just be comp 1 and then another month goes by and it could be comp 2. And then it could be national comp, let's say. I don't know. It just depends on your sport. So again, just give us an idea. So you've planned out the fixtures or you've planned that sort of part of it out there. It doesn't need too much detail in there, but just make sure that's all up to date. It should be a full season, but we're just sort of going up to sort of Christmassy time here and just having an idea of your 18 session plans all linked in together. And we need to see a copy of that. If you look at the very bottom here, sheet 1, this is a much more complex thing. You don't really need to pay attention to that one, but that's what proper clubs will be looking at and how they look at whole session plans. And you can see sort of event priority and games and stuff down here. And there's quite a lot of stuff going on that sheet. Okay, so don't worry about it too much. But that's what one would look like in a much more higher level sort of performance orientated environment. You just need to decide on what are your events or games. So like how it is, fill out this section here. So let me just put that in a different color, just so you remember to do it. And then fill out your events and competitions if you wanted to. There, okay. And then put in all 18 themes in this bit here. And you need to submit that with your report because then you can talk about it in your report for number 5, okay, which I think was a little bit muddled up in terms of the terminology. That's the conceptual model part of it here, okay. So there's number 5 here. So how do you gather the knowledge of the planning process and devise a conceptual model that illustrates what the coaching program will look like? Identify and incorporate the different stages of the program and the overarching macro right down to the individual participant targets, including where the evaluation schedule would appear. So that's where you use this PowerPoint, this thing here, and you put all that stuff in there. Okay. So if you do have an evaluation once a month, a coach's evaluation, write that in there if you need to write evaluation in there. For example, you might have the individual player targets. You want to talk about them, reviews those, put those in there. Just depends on your game and what your sport is. So yeah, put all your competitions in and then just you find another way. If you need to, you don't want to confuse the fixtures and the events because depending on your sport, then just make another sort of column, move this stuff around and then happy days. Okay. So put all your competitions in there, put all that information in there, and then make sure that gets submitted with your report. That, alongside with your risk assessment, is all we need to see. And then that's what it is. Put all your bibliography, your reference list in there, and make sure your spreadsheet that I just showed you in Excel goes in your appendix as well with your hazard or your risk assessment as well. And then you guys are good to go. Good luck with this. I'm sorry it's a bit long, this one. It's quite a big assessment, but I'm sure you'll be fine. I'm sure your lectures will help you as well if you need it. I'm sure we can get an example of one for you as well, if that would help a little bit later on. All right, take care.